Upon arriving at the designated high-rise condominium, I approached the concierge and received the keys to the apartment. We took the elevator reserved for the higher floors up to the top floor.
Wow, it's beautiful.
My husband's sister, Victoria, exclaimed as she danced into the apartment first when the doors opened. "Let's get in packing." I called out, but nobody offered to help. As expected, but still frustrating. The movers placed the boxes where I directed, and I began unpacking alone.
I'll take the largest room.
Emma gets the smallest storage room.
They went ahead with such room assignments on their own, but I ignored them and continued my work.
This really is a lovely apartment.
It's perfect as our final home.
That's great.
Kevin and his family were all smiles.
It's like a dream to live in such a house.
Victoria said, her eyes tearing up. It was about time to reveal the truth. "Oh, whose house are you talking about?"
Huh?
"My name is Emma. I'm 32 years old. I work as a freelance illustrator. Originally, I worked for a major publishing company, but I went independent and now primarily take on projects from my former employer while also starting to work as a children's picture book author. I married my husband, Kevin, 2 years ago, and we started living together in the condo where I reside. The reason we live in my place is because I own the property, and Kevin, who was renting elsewhere, moved in here. When I was young, my parents died in a car accident. After that, I was raised by my grandparents, but I bought this condo after I graduated from college and started working. I used the compensation and insurance money from my parents' accident to make the payments. My grandparents had saved this money for me and gave it to me when I graduated from college, telling me to use it for myself. I bought this place because my grandparents had moved into elder care homes. My grandparents had reserved a spot in the facility, planning to move there together once they had finished raising me. It seems they did it because they didn't want me to go through the trouble of caregiving. After considering everything, I bought this condo because it was convenient for getting to work by a single train ride and also for visiting my grandparents in their facility. Despite their objections that there might be other things to spend the money on, I felt this was the best use of it. I've been living here for almost 10 years now. It's about the same amount of time I lived with my parents before they died, and the same amount of time I lived with my grandparents. That makes it about 1/3 of my life spent here. It's a home I've grown quite attached to. I met Kevin at a wedding after party of a college friend. Kevin was a colleague of the groom from his company. As it happened, there were many people of the same age there, and there we formed a friend group. Eventually, several couples formed within this group, and a few have even gotten married. Kevin and I were one of those couples. Kevin is outgoing and always seems to brighten up the room. I was attracted to him from the first time I met him. I admired his cheerful nature, which was something I didn't have, and gradually came to think of him as a wonderful person. However, that was just a facade Kevin showed to the world, and I soon came to see another side of him after we got married. Kevin was very gentlemanly while we were dating, but he turned out to be the type who wouldn't spoil his catch, so to speak. Actually, it was even worse than that. He was the type who tries to exploit the fish he caught.
I'm living in your house, so you should cover the living expenses.
What do you mean?
Even if I weren't living here, the expenses would be the same, right? So, you should keep paying what you've been paying. That's fair, isn't it?
Indeed, I had already finished paying off my condo, and there was no mortgage left. However, there are still maintenance fees and a reserve fund for repairs and property taxes as well. I also pay for the parking areas since I have a car.
So, you'd be paying that money whether I was here or not, right?
Well, yes, but
Then there's no problem if you continue to pay it as before, right?
at first glance, his argument doesn't seem illogical, but it actually is. But Kevin, you're going to live here from now on too, and we agreed to split the living expenses. I really would like you to contribute. Then Kevin narrowed his eyes and said sharply,
You're such a greedy woman. A real miser. I had no idea you were like this.
I was so shocked, I couldn't even speak. I had assumed, as we were going to live as a couple, that naturally we would be equals. I had simply assumed that he would share the costs of the home we lived in together.
I'm not saying I won't pay a single cent. Of course, I'll cover half of what I use. But you're the owner of this house, right?
So, because it's my property, I'm supposed to cover all the related costs.
I'll pay for my own necessities. Isn't that good enough?
Reluctantly, I accepted his proposal. At the beginning of our marriage, Kevin had paid half of the living expenses. But it's only the amounts I requested. The electricity bill was this much this month.
That seems pretty high. Aren't you wasting money working from home?
I had quit my job during our relationship and started working freelance from home. While I do go out for meetings and other engagements, I do most of my work from home.
It seems unfair.
Kevin first brought up the utility bills. Unfair. How so?
Well, I work outside almost all day, and yet I'm supposed to pay for your share of the electricity while you work at home.
What kind of argument is that? I was too astounded to respond.
I only use a little bit of electricity when I get home until I go to bed, so I don't need to pay half, right?
After that, Kevin hardly paid anything at all. He applied the same logic to the gas and water bills. Still, I tolerated it at the time. Indeed, Kevin was only at home for a short time after coming home. Though the utilities significantly increased with an additional person, it's impossible to precisely determine who used how much. Despite his complaining, he did cover for some of the living expenses, so I silently accepted Kevin's reasoning. Looking back now, I'm appalled at how foolish I was, but at that time, I felt there was no other way. I decided it was better to tolerate this and have a peaceful married life than to start our marriage with weird conflicts. Aside from the money issues, Kevin was just as bright and fun as he was before we got married. Of course, the money issue always nagged at me, but I wasn't struggling financially without his contributions, and I thought it was more important to spend time together in good spirits. But the supposedly happy times began to feel increasingly precarious.
More overtime again. I really wish they'd stop this.
Kevin said grumpily as he came back home from work later and later. Aren't you concerned about your health with all this overtime? There's supposed to be a guideline no more than 45 hours a month, I think.
You don't get it. Those are just numbers for show. A good salesperson works a lot behind the scenes.
Kevin said dismissively.
Emma, you've had times when you stayed up all night to meet a deadline, right?
Yes, that's true.
That's what I'm talking about. Don't be misled by just the numbers.
I graduated from an art college and went straight into working as an illustrator. So, indeed, I know nothing about sales jobs. When he put it that way, all I could do was believe him. Got it, but please don't overdo it.
I know. You're so kind, Emma. I won't push myself too hard.
Kevin said as he gently hugged my shoulders. I tried to force myself to believe in Kevin's kindness. Believing seemed to be the only way to keep my mind at peace. Over the course of a year, I gradually felt betrayed by Kevin. It is said that people can respond to pain when it is inflicted all at once, but when pain is inflicted gradually, they eventually become numb. Kevin had betrayed me numerous times. Despite him betraying me many times, I told myself to tolerate it and carried on that way. In other words, I was pretending like nothing had happened. Then suddenly, a significant event occurred.
My family will be visiting soon. Is that okay?
One morning, Kevin suddenly mentioned this. James and Laura?
And Victoria too.
I had visited his family home once before we got married. It was a small, old house in the countryside. Apparently, it had been built quite some time ago, worn out here and there, but his parents, James and Laura, lived there together. At that time, his sister Victoria had already married and moved out, so I didn't meet her.
I have plans and can't make it, so please send her my regards.
I did contact her, but I only received a message from her. Since we had no wedding ceremony and only took photos, so the only time I met his parents were when I visited them at their home. Of course, there was no opportunity to meet Victoria. Our friends threw a celebration party, but I hadn't met any of Kevin's relatives during such events. I myself wasn't close to my own relatives, so I didn't find it particularly strange. Now they were suddenly planning to visit. It was a year into our marriage, so it wasn't odd that they wanted to see how we were doing. I agreed to Kevin's request without any questions. A week later, as planned, they arrived at our home.
This is Kevin's house. It's not very big, is it?
That was the first thing said upon entering. Of course, it isn't very big. This house was originally bought for me to live in alone. There's a living room, a dining area, and 3 bedrooms. One of the bedrooms is basically for guests, and the remaining rooms I used as my office and bedroom. When Kevin moved in, he wanted some space to work from home too, so I gave up my office for his study, and now I work in the living room. The house has enough room for a couple to live comfortably without any inconveniences. While I was thinking about this, Laura entered the house, followed by Victoria, who I was meeting for the first time.
It really is smaller than I thought. Are you going to continue to live here together?
It's small, but bear with it. You know what they say, home is where you make it.
Well, it's better than nothing. I'll manage to live here.
I wonder how long they plan to stay. As I pondered this, Kevin snapped at me with irritation.
Hey, what are you spacing out for? Hurry up and bring in their luggage.
Sorry. Which are the bags? Maybe just enough luggage for a short stay, like a duffel bag. I looked inside the entrance, but saw nothing.
What are you looking at? They're outside, God.
In a rush, I looked down the hallway, and there were about 10 cardboard boxes stacked there. Cardboard boxes for a visit to their son's house? I couldn't understand what was going on, but leaving such items in the hallway would be a nuisance to other residents. Fortunately, the boxes weren't too heavy, and I managed to carry all of them into the living room by myself. The living dining area is quite spacious, and though it was kind of in the way, I managed to find enough space to stack them. Meanwhile, Kevin and his family were sitting and talking.
Once you finish moving the luggage, it's time for tea. Hurry up. Everyone's tired.
Overwhelmed by the situation, I moved to Kevin's commands without giving thought to what I was being told to do.
Really? What an inconsiderate daughter-in-law.
I dread to think what the future holds.
I'll sleep in this room.
As I was making coffee, bewildered, Victoria declared our bedroom as her room.
That's fine. I'll sleep in the guest room with Mom and Dad.
It'll be nice to sleep with Kevin after such a long time.
Just the family, no outsiders.
Kevin and his family were enjoying their time together as if I didn't exist. Our home only has one bedroom, a guest room, and what used to be my office but is now Kevin's study. I wonder where I'm supposed to sleep, and how long will this situation last? It seems humans can't think straight when faced with situations that far exceed their normalcy. While I was stunned, it all became a done deal. The next day, no, the moment they moved in, a nightmarish life began.
Hey, isn't dinner ready yet?
Sorry, I'm preparing it right now.
You're really slow. I don't know how Kevin puts up with a wife like you.
They just laze around the house all day and do nothing. And they treat me like a servant, ordering me around with just a gesture. At first, I thought I just had to endure it for a few days and kept quiet. However, when I overheard Kevin and his family talking, I realized this was meant to be a permanent arrangement. Here's the gist of it. They had fled from their hometown. This was because Victoria had returned home after her divorce. The reason for the divorce was Victoria's infidelity. She had been unfaithful with several people. Eventually, everything came out, and she was sued for damages by her ex-husband and the wives of her partners, facing fines she couldn't possibly pay, so they fled here. Kevin had told me their house was owned by them, but that was a lie too. Originally, that house belonged to Laura's family, and her parents lived there. Laura and James moved in due to their inability to support themselves, and after Laura's parents passed away, they just stayed. The real owner was Laura's brother, John, who had been telling them to leave for a long time, but they continued to live there, using their right to reside as a shield. John, having his own house, couldn't bring himself to forcefully evict his sister's family, and though he asked them to leave, he couldn't do more than that. Then, with Victoria returning burdened by a mountain of alimony debts, Laura and James tried to sell the house to make money. John was furious when he found out. He threatened legal action, so they grabbed what they could and fled to our house. Those 10 cardboard boxes were all they could bring. It is the luggage I struggled to bring into the house on the day they arrived. That was all their possessions. I don't know and don't want to know what's inside them, but it seems unlikely there's anything of any real value. All things considered, they rolled into our home penniless. And now, it seems they plan to live off us indefinitely. Among them, luckily, Kevin was smart. He did well in school and managed to graduate from college on a scholarship. From the outside, you'd never guess he was part of such a family. He continued to play the role of a fresh-faced good young man, landed a job at a fairly reputable company, and met and married me. I had no way of seeing through Kevin's true nature or his family's real situation. Already alone with no parents. And I work and own my home. No doubt I was an easy target for Kevin. This isn't any joke. Now that I know everything, I refuse to quietly play the slave. I won't be manipulated by such a despicable family. I started thinking about how to fight back and began taking action the next day. For now, the best strategy was to act submissive. I couldn't let Kevin or his family know about my plans. I needed to lull them into a false sense of security and then take them by surprise. Just like they had suddenly shown up here, I would make my move unexpectedly. I continued to nod along to whatever they said, and about a week later, Victoria approached me.
I need some money.
She demanded, thrusting out her open hand. It was a straightforward attempt to mooch off me. I was annoyed, but I had decided not to oppose them for now. I handed Victoria some of the money I had in my wallet.
Is this all? Don't you have more?
Well, this was unexpected, so I don't have more on me right now.
Then a credit card will do.
Absolutely not. If I handed over a credit card, who knows what they might charge to it? I can't lend you the card. I'll withdraw some money from the bank tomorrow. Please wait until then. I managed to quiet their complaints with a promise. No matter what, I wouldn't hand over my credit card. That night, when Kevin came home, he complained about it.
You could at least lend her the card. You really are greedy.
I was shocked by his words, but I had my reasons, so I apologized. I'm sorry. I thought there could be problems if something happened with the card.
Like what?
I was afraid they might get arrested for misuse if I gave them a card with a different name on it. Kevin seemed satisfied with this explanation.
Then make a family card for Mom and the others. I'm counting on you.
Understood. I replied, but I had no intention of actually doing it. About a month later, Kevin asked about the status of the family card. I've given them money several times, but perhaps they grew tired of waiting and pressured Kevin for a card. Sorry, it seems I can't get that made, I said with feigned disappointment. I hadn't even applied for a family card, and I certainly wasn't sorry about it.
Why not?
They said they can't be recognized as families since they're just relatives and it's only temporary residency. They had just shown up and announced, with no formal arrangements to live together. They haven't even transferred their residency documents, so it seems they're not considered to have actual residency.
Is that so?
Kevin had no choice but to add PDMY explanation.
Well then, we should just change our residency.
That's right. We're planning to live here for a while anyway.
Get on with the procedures then.
Presumptuously, they commanded me to handle the procedures. About that, I think this house is a bit small to live in permanently.
Now that you mention it, that might be true.
Maybe that's why, Kevin, you hardly come home these days. At this, Kevin looked a bit annoyed.
I've been staying at hotels because work keeps me late.
Yes, that must be tough. Work is hard. That's what I thought. Why don't we move from here? Kevin and his family were surprised by my suggestion. This house was originally bought for me to live alone, and while Kevin and I can manage, it's definitely too cramped with the current situation.
That makes sense.
Look at this. Wouldn't you want to live in a house like this? I showed them information. It was a newly built high-rise condominium in the city. The brochure showed a photo of the top-floor apartment. It was spacious with large windows that offered a commanding view of the city below.
Where did you get the idea for such an apartment?
I thought it was too cramped here, so I decided to go for it. I'm selling this place and using my parents' inheritance and my savings to buy it.
That sounds great. This place isn't bad, but that would definitely be better.
Kevin and Victoria, initially skeptical, relaxed their expressions when they learned I had already paid for it.
Well, you are thoughtful after all. I'm seeing you in a new light.
Yeah, I guess you can be considered our daughter-in-law.
Laura and James also nodded in agreement, smiling. And just like that, the move was settled. About a month later, the moving day arrived. It's a bit sad to say goodbye to the house I've lived in for so many years, but it's for a brighter future. Once the luggage was loaded into 2 trucks, we set off for our destination in 2 taxis. Upon arriving at the designated high-rise condominium, I approached the concierge and received the keys to the apartment. We took the elevator reserved for the higher floors up to the top floor.
Wow, it's beautiful.
Victoria exclaimed as she danced into the apartment first when the doors opened. "Let's get in packing." I called out, but nobody offered to help. As expected, but still frustrating. The movers placed the boxes where I directed, and I began unpacking alone.
I'll take the largest room.
Emma gets the smallest storage room.
They went ahead with such room assignments on their own, but I ignored them and continued my work.
This really is a lovely apartment.
It's perfect as our final home.
That's great.
Kevin and his family were all smiles.
It's like a dream to live in such a house.
Victoria said, her eyes tearing up. It was about time to reveal the truth. Whose house are you talking about?
Huh?
It was the perfect time to make them face the reality. Why do you think you're living here?
What are you talking about? It's our new home. Of course, we're going to live here.
I feigned surprise. This isn't your house. This is the house I bought to live with my grandparents.
You asked if we wanted to live in such a house.
Victoria began to make a scene. Yes, I did ask if you wanted to, but I never said you could live here. This is exactly what I said. I never mentioned living together. Who would want to live with these people forever? That's the situation, so please leave immediately. I own this house and the owner is asking you to leave. Please comply before things get complicated.
Are you kidding me?
Kevin stomped his feet loudly, his face turning bright red.
You should just listen to what I say. My family and I will live in this house. If you don't like it, you leave.
That's right. Get out.
Yeah, get out.
That's right.
They all pressed me to leave. I contacted the concierge directly through the intercom on the wall. Sorry to bother you, but there are some strange people squatting in my apartment and they're trying to kick me out, the actual resident. Please come immediately. As soon as I finished speaking, a siren went off inside the apartment.
What's that?
What is this noise?
No way.
Turn it off now.
Upon receiving the alert, the security guard quickly arrived at the apartment. True to its reputation as a luxury condominium, these are the building's security guards. If you don't leave now, I'll call the police next. When the intercom at the door buzzed and the guard asked, "What's going on?" they started to panic. They realized I wasn't lying.
Listen to us.
The security guard had arrived, but they were groveling, begging. I decided to listen. I was curious to hear what Kevin had been telling them.
She is a pitiful woman with no relatives, and that she couldn't manage without me, so I'm just keeping her here.
This was what he was telling them.
That's why you can use it as you like. You're like a housekeeper.
I showed them mercy because they provided me with valuable testimony. In fact, when I had given them money, I had them sign a piece of paper noting the amount. In other words, it was effectively a promissory note. I need proof that I've given the money so that I could show it to Kevin. Otherwise, I'll get in trouble. Write it down and I'll give you as much as you want. Knowing they could get money as long as they signed, they willingly did so. Thanks to this, I had proof of how much I lent them. I had thought about collecting from them, but they wouldn't be able to pay it back, so I decided to get it from Kevin instead and just kick them out of the apartment. Thanks for everything. If you leave now, we can forget all this ever happened. But if you come back, you'll have to pay everything at once. When I waved the promissory note, they finally gave up and left.
I am Emma's husband. I have a right to live here. I'm not leaving.
Kevin declared, but he alone refused to move. If that's how it's going to be, let's settle this here. All right, let's talk. But just know if you try anything funny, I'll call for help immediately. I thanked the security guards and asked them to leave for now.
Why are you doing this? Did you really dislike my family that much?
Of course, I did. They came out of nowhere like it was some kind of ambush and treated me like a slave. I snapped back at Kevin.
All right, if you dislike them that much, I'll ask my mom and the others to leave. But I can stay, right?
I was appalled. He was willing to abandon his own family just to stay here. He truly was despicable. No, you need to leave too.
Why? Aren't we married?
I presented a file to Kevin.
This is...
Kevin went pale as he looked through the contents of the file. Such a pretty young lady, huh? I hear you've been living with her half the week. The file contained evidence of Kevin's affair. It was full of photos of him arm in arm with another woman, entering a hotel together. Kevin had started seeing his mistress right after marrying me. So, you were saying how you'd eventually leave Emma and live in that condo, weren't you?
That's a lie. Who told you such nonsense?
I turned on the voice recorder I was holding. The voice of Kevin's mistress played, and Kevin froze. It was evidence gathered by the private detective. The detective had approached the mistress, kindly informed her that Kevin was married, and recorded what she said.
Kevin is in the midst of divorce proceedings, and once he kicks out his ex-wife, we plan to live together in Kevin's condo.
She said it boastfully.
I've told her that I want to leave, but Emma won't agree to the divorce. Once she gets tired of my family using her like a slave, she'd leave on her own.
That's what Kevin told his mistress. the detective relayed.
I'm the only one Kevin loves. His relationship with his wife has completely cooled off, and true love will prevail in the end.
The mistress laughed as she said this. But when she realized she was speaking to a private detective, she quickly shifted to self-preservation.
I was deceived by Kevin too. I truly believed their marriage was broken. I'll tell you everything, please don't make me pay fines.
She pleaded.
What should we do?
I told him, it depends on what she says. Then she spilled everything we hadn't even asked for. All of this was recorded. True love seems quite fragile. Yep, I've got the evidence. Looks like it's going to be a hefty alimony. Kevin collapsed on the floor. Your things have been sent to that woman's condo, so you can live there from today. Now get out. I contacted the concierge again and kicked out a drained Kevin. I decided to let the mistress go as promised. Her testimony was enough to prove Kevin's misconduct. Thanks to that, I was able to get a substantial alimony from Kevin. It was such a huge amount that I really didn't need to ask for the alimony from the mistress. Instead, I spoke with the mistress' parents and her company. I hadn't promised to keep silent, so it's okay to talk about it. The mistress was Kevin's junior colleague. They grew closer as they started working together. If it weren't for the marriage, it could have been a fine story. What kind of training are you giving to your employees? Thanks to you, I ended up getting a divorce. I told her company, and they apologized for the lack of supervision. Concerned about their public image, the company labeled her resignation as voluntary, while Kevin was demoted and transferred from the headquarters to a subsidiary. They were both lying about being on sales calls to go to hotels and treated trips as business travel. Given the damage they caused the company, such measures were justified. I've heard rumors that his family is now really living together in the mistress apartment.
This mess is your fault. Take responsibility.
I was told they've settled in the apartment where Kevin and his mistress live. They've taken on debts to pay me alimony. They are now barely hanging, struggling to pay back the debts. It might be time they'd force Kevin's family out soon. Kevin thought I was a pitiable woman burdened with grandparents in a facility, but the reality is quite different. My grandparents were indeed in a facility, but it was a luxurious one for wealthy people living gracefully. My grandparents used to run a business and planned to pass it on to my parents, but they passed away young, so they handed it over to someone trustworthy and retired. It was the year I graduated from college. I've always loved drawing since childhood and have won many awards. I told my grandparents I wanted to pursue a career in art, so they never forced me to take over the business. They decided to enter the facility so I could live freely. I've pursued a career related to art as I wished, and now I'm known as a children's picture book author. My books have become very successful, making me somewhat famous. I feel like my luck turned around quickly after leaving Kevin. He must be regretting it by now. I invested the money from selling that apartment, my parents' inheritance, and the royalties from my books into buying that high-rise apartment. I wanted to live with my grandparents again while they are still healthy. Of course, I kept the facility for them. If one of them ever becomes unable to move freely, they'll need the extensive care provided there. But for now, they're both still active. The success of my books has finally allowed me to give back to my grandparents. We should be able to live happily together for a while longer. Getting involved with that man brought some trouble, but my future is looking bright.